In Awoma, two powerful men controlled the destiny of the village: Chief Okaka, the wealthy landowner who had inherited vast farmlands from his ancestors, and Honorable Boniface, the influential politician who controlled government aid to the region. They had once been friends, but greed is a disease that feeds on trust. A disagreement over land boundaries turned into insult, and insults turned into an all-out war of pride. Chief Okaka began accusing Boniface of cheating the villagers out of government projects. Boniface fired back, accusing Okaka of exploiting farmers and hoarding land. Soon, their followers, men who once worked side by side in the same fields, began to pick sides. Friendships broke, markets turned into arenas of heated arguments, and the air was heavy with mistrust. It was a bright market day in Awoma, the kind of day when traders filled the air with shouts, bargaining voices mixed with the smell of fresh palm oil, and children chased each other between stalls. Among the crowd, two men, Abika, a yam seller loyal to Chief Okaka, and Ease, a palm oil merchant who supported Honorable Boniface, argued over a simple deal. Abika claimed the price for a basket of yams had doubled because government trucks bringing supplies had been blocked. Ease laughed and accused Okaka's people of greed. The argument drew curious eyes. Words became insults. Insults became shoves. A basket of yams rolled into the dirt. Ease's brother, hearing the commotion, rushed in and pushed Abika hard. Abika fell against another trader's stall, toppling a display of tomatoes. Gasps turned into shouts. In seconds, the fight was no longer between two men, it became Okaka's supporters against Boniface's supporters. Stalls collapsed under the chaos. A young woman's basket of groundnuts spilled across the ground as men swung fists and kicked at each other. Someone threw a stone, another retaliated with a wooden pestle. By midday, smoke curled above the rooftops. 3 houses had been set ablaze in retaliation for insults hurled earlier that week. Mothers screamed for their children. The local clinic, usually quiet, was crowded with men nursing broken arms and bleeding heads. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew, this was only the beginning. Families who had nothing to do with the dispute began to suffer. Crops went untended because the fields lay in contested zones. Women feared sending their children to fetch water at the stream for fear of attacks. Trade with neighboring villages stopped, and food prices soared. The true victims of this war were not the two powerful men, but the poor, hard-working villagers who depended on peace to survive. After the market violence, the rift between Chief Okaka and Honorable Boniface grew into an open war. Each man blamed the other for the chaos, and each was determined to prove his dominance, no matter the cost. Chief Okaka struck first. At dawn one morning, his men used logs and rusted oil drums to block the only main road into Awoma. Government supply trucks carrying rice, beans, and fertilizer were stopped at the barricade. Okaka's orders were clear: if Boniface wants these supplies, he must beg for them. The villagers suffered instantly. Mothers who had walked for hours to collect food aid returned empty-handed, balancing only crying babies on their backs. Boniface, humiliated but unwilling to bow, hit back. Using his political influence, he froze all funding for community projects in Awoma. The half-built health center stood abandoned. Boreholes under construction were left unfinished, forcing women to fetch water from muddy streams again. Even the primary school roof remained unrepaired, so children learned under the sun. But that wasn't all. Boniface ordered his loyal men to block the sale of farm produce from Okaka's lands in the nearby towns. At the border market, traders from Awoma were turned away with baskets of fresh vegetables that would rot by nightfall. The feud poisoned everything. Former friends refused to greet each other. A wedding was postponed because the bride's family belonged to Boniface's camp and the groom's family supported Okaka. Even funerals turned political, with mourners glaring at each other instead of comforting the bereaved. This was no longer a disagreement, it was a slow war. And with every strike and counterstrike, the people of Awoma, indeed, were being crushed. Months of fighting had worn the villagers down. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and the once busy marketplace now looked like an abandoned field. It was in this atmosphere of despair that Mama Oha, the oldest woman in the village and custodian of its history, called for a meeting under the great Iroko tree. Both Chief Okaka and Honorable Boniface came, not because they wanted peace, but because the villagers insisted. The elders sat in a circle, the women formed a wall behind them, and the children, thin and silent, clung to their mother's wrappers. Mama Oha stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her words carried the weight of generations. You two call yourselves leaders. But what is a leader who has no people left to lead? You are killing us, not each other. She then motioned for two young boys to bring something forward. They carried a small, shallow basket covered with cloth. When she lifted the cloth, the crowd gasped. Inside were shriveled yams, all that was left from the last harvest. The boy's mother stepped forward in tears. She spoke directly to the two men. My husband died because there was no food. My children are wasting away. If you want to destroy each other, fine. But let us, the poor, live. Silence fell. For the first time in months, Okaka and Boniface looked at the faces of the people, the hollow cheeks, the hopeless eyes. A younger farmer stepped forward and dropped a withered cassava root at their feet. This, he said, is the fruit of your war. The shame in the air was heavy. Boniface's voice broke first. Okaka. If this continues, we will have no village to rule. Okaka sighed deeply, his pride bleeding out in the silence. Let us end it. My land will be open for planting again. Boniface nodded slowly. And I will restore the projects and supplies. Mama Oha raised her hands to the sky. Let it be known, that you both have heard the cry of the people of Awoma. And for the first time in a long while, there was applause, not loud, but real. The meeting under the great Iroko tree ended with heavy silence. Mama Oha's words, the basket of shriveled yams, and the haunting faces of starving children lingered in the minds of everyone present. But peace was not sealed in one conversation, it had to be built. Over the next few days, the elders of Awoma moved quietly between the homes of Chief Okaka and Honorable Boniface. They brought reports of children collapsing in school from hunger. They showed the two men letters from neighboring villages refusing to trade with Awoma until the fighting stopped. The breaking point came when both men were summoned to the burial of a young farmer named Chisholm, a 24-year-old who had died from a simple infection. In better times, the medicine he needed would have been available at the health center. But the clinic's shelves had been empty for weeks due to the blockade and frozen funding. Chief Okaka stood on one side of the graveside, Boniface on the other, avoiding eye contact. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, Chisholm's mother wailed. My son is gone, but you two still hold on to your pride. The word struck deeper than any insult ever had. Okaka looked up at Boniface, his voice low but firm. We've gone too far. Boniface's jaw tightened. We have both caused this. Right there, between the mourners and the fresh mound of earth, the two men walked toward each other. It wasn't the handshake of friends, it was the handshake of men who finally understood the cost of their stubbornness. Okaka promised to open all farmlands immediately. Boniface pledged to restore every project and push emergency supplies into Awoma within a week. The elders nodded in relief, knowing that even if trust would take years to rebuild, survival could not wait. The news spread like harmattan fire. Both men had stopped fighting. The days after the handshake were filled with cautious hope. Word spread quickly beyond Awoma, the roadblock was dismantled, and for the first time in months, the sound of approaching trucks echoed through the village. The first government supply truck arrived at dawn. Villagers gathered to watch as bags of rice, beans, and cartons of medicine were unloaded. Mothers wept openly, holding food in their hands as if it were gold. At the clinic, the nurse restocked shelves with antibiotics and painkillers, her hands trembling from relief. On the farmlands, men and women returned with hoes and cutlasses, clearing weeds that had grown high during the months of neglect. The soil, cracked from the dry season, drank eagerly as water from the restored boreholes splashed into buckets. Children ran barefoot through the fields, chasing one another with laughter that had been missing for too long. But not all wounds healed overnight. Some neighbors still avoided each other, unwilling to forget insults exchanged during the feud. Broken friendships needed time to mend. And every now and then, the memory of burnt houses and ruined harvests reminded the people of the cost of division. Still, there was movement, there was planting, there was trade, life was beginning again. The grass was growing back after being trampled. And the village was determined not to let both men fight ever again. In Owoma, the clash between two powerful men didn't just wound their pride, it wounded an entire community. The lesson was clear: when the powerful lose control, the powerless lose everything. Fights between leaders aren't just battles of words or power, they spill into the lives of people who had no part in starting them, destroying homes, dreams, and futures along the way. In life, the true measure of leadership isn't how fiercely you defend your pride, but how fiercely you protect the people who depend on you. Sometimes, peace isn't about friendship, it's about responsibility. Sometimes, walking away from a fight isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strength. And in the end, the question isn't who won the battle, the real question is who was left standing after the dust settled. And at what cost? Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And remember, stories like this are not just about the past. They are warnings for the present.